Welcome to FinScale, a podcast created by Solen Niederkorn, shedding light on innovation in finance, banking, and insurance.
Investor relations, the secret ingredient of VCs. Daniel Keiper-Knorr, partner at Speedinvest.
In Speedinvest, we are not organized by geo coverage, but by specific technology sectors that we focus on. And what we try to do is to have in each of those offices people from every investment team being able to directly connect with the local ecosystem, build relationship with the founders early on to then by the moment they are raising capital, we already know them.
The crucial role investor relations plays in the VC world is just one of the topics we dive into with Daniel during this episode. You'll discover that not only is this a subject that Speedinvest takes very seriously, but more often that investor relation is not given the kudos it deserves. What we find out is that there is clearly a parallel to startup funding rounds, and it's not laughing matter when it comes to institutional investors. Daniel gives us a behind-the-scenes look at these Austrian-based VCs' modus operandi, the tools they use, how their various offices operate, and how it all comes together. And finally, we talk about their investment thesis and unearth some of the gold nuggets in their portfolio. The VC as you have never seen it before. Enjoy listening! Hello, everyone. Hi, Daniel.
Hello. Hi, Solen.
I'm happy that we have the time to talk together today and very happy to talk about Speedinvest. Maybe I can ask you to present yourself 1-2 minutes for the people who don't know you yet.
Pleasure. So thank you. Thank you for the invitation. Happy New Year, everyone.
Yeah.
First week back in the office. So my name is Daniel. I'm one of the 5 founding partners of Vienna-based European venture capital firm Speedinvest. We started Speedinvest almost 12 years ago, back in 2010/2011, after 3 of the 5 co-founding partners having sold jointly, including myself, our technology company 3 years prior to that we built up in the early years of 2000 to 2006. And after the earnout period was over, we sat down together, thought what could be the next thing, and eventually came up with what turned now out to be Speedinvest. And me personally, I'm a Vienna-based. I was a banker before I entered the tech and venture capital ecosystem over 20 years ago. I used to work in asset management, equities trading, and private banking for 5 years, combined with Erste Bank and Credit Suisse in Zurich. And studied economy in Fribourg in Switzerland. Ski instructor before that. A typical Austrian career, I would say.
Thank you very much, Daniel. So actually, when I met Daniel, we were supposed to talk 20 minutes, and then it lasts, I guess, 90 minutes. So I hope it's going to be a bit shorter today.
I'll do my best.
Yes, I was very interested. I mean, it's so interesting. I was very interested when we discussed last time because you have a different vision from what I generally hear from many VCs I've been discussing with, and about investor relations. Mm-hmm. This is something that you're holding for Speedinvest because you're the partner in charge of investor relations. So maybe before talking about specifically about Speedinvest, would it be possible for you to share with us what means a good VC organization first, mm-hmm. and then what is the role of investor relations within Speedinvest more specifically?
Well, I think let me probably, despite the order of your question, start with the second question, because I think that's the easier one, or at least the shorter answer.
Yeah.
I think the core competency in investor relations is basically managing expectations, bringing a broad set of experience and knowledge and skills to it. Of course, the core competency is actually communications, and that's something not so easy to be learned. It's something acquired over years, and trying to or developing an understanding of the audience you are communicating with, who are actually your LPs. Our LP base is pretty diverse, and I think we get to this a bit later on in the talk. Then it developed significantly from having been a tiny group of friends and families into a full-scale institutional investor LP base. And as over time that LP base developed, so has the way and the content of the communications that you're using. And I think that is the core competence. Of course, you have to have all your numbers ready on the spot, on time, always right, managing expectations and avoiding surprises. This is what investors love the least, is surprises. Of course, a good surprise is always welcome, but again, it's a surprise. It's something you're not prepared for. And we are navigating in a market of such big uncertainty, and the job of investor relations is to take out as much surprise potential as possible. And then coming back to the wider scope of things, what in our belief makes a good venture capital organization, I think it's all about a team effort. We're not believing so much into the concept of solo GP. We learned ourselves that nobody can master all tasks at an equally good level that is good enough to actually talk to LPs and ask them for their hard-earned, bitterly taxed money to give you, and then to invest in high-risk assets. So bring together a team, a complementary team that builds with all its single elements a well-rounded team, subject matter expertise in what you are investing, diverse team from various aspects like education, background, gender, demographic origin, whatever have you. Bring together as many opinions as possible, and of course work with smart and kind people.
Of course.
The basics, of course. So much, basics. I think it's not differing so much over other industries. What makes a good organization in any other industry. Like you got to be curious, both fast thinking, curious, and still diligent, and humble. You know, if there's one thing I think the whole industry learned in the past 3 years is that you can't take anything for granted.
Clearly. No, I raised the question because you have, like me, a past experience, a former experience in, I would say, the heavy and complex banking industry. And VC has remained for years a niche activity, and it's been booming.
That is true. That is correct. So that is specifically true for Europe. Yeah. Maybe less so for the US, of course, and also within Europe, there are stark differences. So continental Europe, German-speaking continental Europe, where we are from, probably has, together with Eastern Europe, that has been under communist rule for all too long, the least experience with venture capital. Northern countries, UK, Netherlands, Scandinavia have far more experience. Even France as well. France, Belgium, French-speaking Europe is far ahead of German-speaking Europe with regards to this. In that case, you are, I think, definitely true. It's a fairly comparably young niche of the industry. Obviously, with the liquidity supply of the past 10 to 15 years, the whole private equity part, and within private equity, venture specifically got a lot of attention. It maybe developed in the most recent 1 or 2 years, in 20 and 21, maybe a bit too fast even, and now we are sobering out from that party, if you will. But we are still back on to the long-term multi-decade trend, and from our perspective, we see no reason why this should change over the coming decade. But it is a young industry. You're right.
So maybe going back to your first answer about investor relation, this is something so that we're not so much talking about. We know that VC raise funds and we have a lot of feedback from just the amount, but not from the process itself. And I was interested to maybe deep dive into this specifically and to understand how you build an investor relation strategy, because it means it's like raising fund for such as a startup. So there is behind a rational or a strategy to implement, to put in place. So how do you personally build this and built over the years this strategy for Speedinvest?
Well, thanks for the question. It's a super interesting discussion, actually, and also we experienced ourselves that part of the market in venture capital, specifically in private equity in general, is, I think, it gets far too less attention. Everybody, for good reasons, is looking at the investment side of things and the technology side of things and funding startups, scouting startups, working with founders, building unicorns. And so, but the other part of the market, where actually the capital comes from to actually build a unicorn, is very opaque, is very secretive. People don't talk about it. People don't write about it, and I think that is wrong, and that is totally wrong. That part of the market, a fund actually is a two-sided marketplace, right? There's a manager in the middle that takes money from one side, puts money on the other side, multiplies that money over there and gets it back to the other side out again. And if so, he's doing well, he can keep 20% of the gains. That is basically the concept of Amazon, a marketplace. Yeah, true.
Yeah, it's true.
And obviously that capital supply side of the business needs more attention. Because that is still the bottleneck. I'm totally not worried about the next generation of founders. We see 8,000 to 12,000 investment opportunities every single year. But we're not seeing 8,000 to 12,000 new potential LP partners in a year. The market is far smaller. The LP market works in a total different speed as the startup side of the market. But then again, there are many parallels to raising a fund versus raising capital into a startup. If you do so, you always have to do it with already the next funding round, respectively the next fund in mind. Where do you
exactly.
not with fund number 2, but with fund number 3? And I think it's two very critical moments in the development of a VC firm. First, obviously, the 0 to 1 moment, the first fund. On what thesis do you build this? How do you approach LPs? Our first fund was a 10 million small boutique, funded by 30 friends and family.
Okay.
Every single one.
This is how it starts, generally.
Either related to or we knew over years and we were very good friends. So basically the biggest responsibility we had in our first fund. Yeah. Because if that one would have gone under, we could all have emigrated to the Polynesia. And then even probably the first moment from 0 to 1 is just you dare doing it or you don't. You don't know how it's going to play out. The even more critical moment is the next fund, because typically that comes 3, 4, back then it was 5 years after the first one. But in normal years, you don't have any successes to show at that point in time, specifically when you're building a pre-seed and seed stage portfolio. You don't have any successes to show. And then you ask the second time round for money, again, only on the promise. And then when you...
So you need credibility. How do you build this credibility?
You need credibility, and you better not fuck up. Yeah?
I can imagine.
Then with every further fund generation, it actually gets easier. Because now we are we closed fund number 3, we now raised fund number 4. Fund number 1 and 2 are already producing results, returning capital to the LPs. We have proven that we can actually turn around and successfully sell portfolio companies, liquidate and get that liquidity back to the LPs. Once you are beyond that point, it's not automatically that you would raise the next fund, but you're building credibility and brand name with every new generation. And actually it gets easier and easier and easier. And or maybe even paradoxically or counterintuitively, the larger funds you raise, the maybe easier it gets. Because the larger the fund, the larger the LPs you can talk to. Typically, insurance company would not write checks smaller than 20 or 30 million and must not be more than 10% of the fund. That requires you to have a 200 to 300 million fund to even be able to talk to these potential LPs. Whereas private individuals, ultra high net worth, family offices and endowments and similar, they have a far broader range and less strict rules where to invest. But that's probably a bit paradox that the bigger funds you're looking to raise, the easier it actually is.
And amongst the different population of investors, of LPs that you mentioned, which is the one where you have the more assets?
Well, that developed significantly over time. As mentioned before, our first fund was a 10 million small, 30 people, friends and family SPV more than it was a fund. And our most recent fund, Speedinvest number 4 from vintage 2022, is a 300 million with probably 60 to 70% of the capital coming from institutional investors. Pension funds, insurance companies, also large state-owned LPs such as EIF, BPI, and the national equivalents in Austria, Germany, and other countries. And these alone make up a third of the fund. And also for them, we were not qualified with our first fund to raise with these LPs.
And in terms of technicity, because I've been working for a year in investor relation in a listed company, so I know more or less how it can be complex. The kind of interactions you have with all those analysts from all those institutional investors, how complex it is or not compared to more, I would say, simplistic investors such as family offices, or maybe not. Maybe I'm wrong. Huh?
It's actually not too complex. My experience is that it's super helpful to have a strong database tech stack in the background, where all the numbers, all the contacts are stored, all the interactions are protocoled. When did you send them last time around an email? So we use a wide range of, a virtual data room supplier. We use a CRM software supplier. But on the further you get to the front end, the more personal it needs to be. And I never sent mass emails. I have never sent a mass email in my whole life. Because when you receive one, on first glance, you see it is a mass email and it goes directly to the bin.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. But
it needs to come from your personal account.
Yeah.
It needs to read personal. And that goes as far as deliberately putting typos in.
Yeah. Okay. Yes, I was thinking of that because I've been performing once a due diligence, and I've been through the process for a fund I was in, and it was a really heavy one. Is it the case for all institutional investors, or you have different practice, for instance, US versus Europe or Asian investors?
Well, my experience is that no two investors, even from the same category, are ever the same. It also on their end depends on who is the person dealing with you. I mean, example here, domestic market, 2 pension funds, one working with an outside advisor, and the other one, they're both same size. In terms of AUM, in terms of asset allocation, very similar, but completely different setup. One completely outsourced to a global advisor, super strict, formalized process. The others totally opposite. We came to terms with both, but it was a completely different process. It's also different people than on our end who actually are running that process. It's different from rank, from mindset, from personality. It is, despite all technology that is involved and rightfully involved, it still remains a people's business no matter what.
Yeah, and you said that Speedinvest is supported by Enough Finequity, so it's the European Investment Fund since already a few years. Is it complicated? I had already David Dana on, and what are the main constraints when you work or even with BPI in France? What are the different 3-4 constraints that you need to bear in mind when you have them as LPs?
Well, we work with EIF now, the second fund generation. So fund number 1 and 2, we did not get to terms with EIF. First fund was too small and too weird. The second fund was still a bit weird. And only the third fund, when we, by growth of AUM and LP base, we converted to the mean or reverted to the mean. And the more mainstream we got, the more chances we had signing with EIF, BPI and the others. These type of investors, and for very, very good reasons, I'm happy that they are investing tax money, right? And they have probably the strictest due diligence process you can imagine, and that is for very, very good reasons. And it's also something where the GP can learn a lot about his own organization and his own setup, and where he needs to improve and set him up for next time round. So we're super happy. They are extremely important to the European ecosystem. But of course, there are some strings attached. So they require you to invest certain amount of X money in the country where, for example, into France. When BPI gives us money, they won't expect that we return money into French startups, which we happily do. So this to us was not a problem, because we have been investing in France ever before, and now we have even more reason to do so. And France is actually our strongest growing startup market from deal flow and deal flow perspective. So that is probably the only meaningful constraint that comes with it, but it's not really a problem.
Mm-hmm. Going back to your European presence, why was there a need to open other offices in Europe, such as Berlin or Paris? Why did you open those offices?
We are investing in seed stage, and in seed stage, startups are unknown. Basically, they are the first months after their own foundation. They don't have any media presence. So in order to be able to scout and find and actually invest in those startups, a fund needs to be present in all the important cities and startup hubs across Europe. And that is, I think, by order of importance, London, Paris, Stockholm, Berlin, followed by several other cities, and with Southern and Eastern Europe significantly catching up. Is in direct comparison to the American ecosystem that for decades only consisted of Boston, New York, and San Francisco, and only very recently 2 or 3 more hubs came up, like Denver, Colorado, Austin, and maybe Miami. In Europe, it's been dispersed over the whole continent ever since day one. In Speedinvest, we are not organized by geo coverage, but by specific technology sectors that we focus on. And what we try to do is to have in each of those offices people from every investment team being able to directly connect with the local ecosystem, build relationship with the founders early on, to then by the moment they are raising capital, we already know them. That is the idea of having multiple offices. Obviously, that brings a bit of organizational challenges with it. So, we try to organize ourselves as a remote and multi-office company from day one. So we're using all sorts of technical communication means, like Zoom calls, Hop in, Slack, WhatsApp channels, whatever have you, Notion, a central repository of documents and knowledge. We have scheduled regular calls in the single teams and in all hands. So twice a year every month we have an all hands call to keep the company updated on internal ongoings. We have weekly deal calls where the single investment teams sit together. Then we have a deal call where all the general partners sit together. We have regular calls for the investor relations operations and team. We have regular calls for finance, legal, and all different operations that you have in a company. It's also important to know, maybe different than many other funds, we do everything in house. Like we're not.
Okay, so you don't delegate all the
obviously, and for sure not for due diligence. We do it all by ourselves, but also for internal and administrative processes. We are not using outside administrators, advisors. We have our 5 people strong legal team. We have our 10 people strong finance team. That dates back to our early beginnings. Remember, we were a 10 million small 5 people team. The assets have simply not been here to afford an outside advisor. And then 4 years after that, when we raised the next fund, that was just under 100 million. There we could have paid an outside advisor, but we knew what it takes, so we didn't have to pay one. And from that moment on, we decided to do everything in-house. It's just faster and cheaper, we think.
Yeah, and it was before or after AIFM directive? That changes.
Coincidentally, that was exactly in the year 2014 and 15.
Yeah.
When AIFM was a pass-through European Commission, and then what the year after was implemented in the single-member countries. This was exactly the year when we raised our second fund. And we only learned 2 months or 1 month before the launch of the fund that we have to file with the authorities.
The present. Thank you very much. Okay. Yes, we have a few minutes left to quickly talk about your portfolio and maybe a focus on your climate tech portfolio. Can you say a few words about your investment, the kind of company? So we understood you're a seed investor. Yes, but what kind of sector do you precisely follow right now?
I'm happy to do so. So as already mentioned before, so we are a pure play software investor. So we either invest in companies that either develop software and license such software, typically now through a SaaS business model, or companies that use and deploy software to radically improve existing products, business models and processes. Just create a 10x better, faster, cheaper and smoother user experience, regardless if it's in B2C or B2B. So that is the common denominator. It's all software. So over the years, we've invested in more than 300 companies. Each of those is a software company. But we learned that there are some sectors that we do understand better than others. And there are some sectors that we expect to outperform over others. That led us to focus on these 6 sectors that I mentioned before. So these 4 vertical approaches, the largest being fintech, the second largest being climate and industrial tech, digital health and deep tech. And then we cross this with 2 horizontal approaches over those 2 software specific business models of SaaS distribution and marketplaces. And that creates a 4x2 matrix resulting in 8 hotspots, along which we probably deploy 95% of the fund's capital. In each of those sectors is covered by a specialist investment team in the range of 4 to probably 12 people. And for the initial investment in one of these companies, the specialist team can decide autonomously. So it's no need of a full partnership decision for the first ticket that we invest. This allows the teams to take quick and informed decisions. So they have all written their thesis on their markets or sectors. What will be the driving technology forces in the next 3, 5, 8 years? What will be the value drivers, the cost drivers? How will consumer behavior evolve and change over time? And trying to anticipate such developments and then scout for for companies addressing those. So when the moment happens that a company, we get across a company's pitch, we instantly see if this is a match with our thesis or not.
Mm-hmm.
And if so, we can, from that limited time in seed stage that you have to perform a due diligence, we can use as much time as possible on what we look for is founder market fit.
Mm-hmm.
Right? A founder, a large market, growing market, no dominant incumbent in play, no dominant digital solution in play, a real and present problem where the users / consumers or B2B clients take big efforts to solve. And if that is there, we see that market would be open for a radically better digital solution. And then we turn to the founder and try to understand the team, the personality. They need to be the smartest people in the room when talking about the subject. They need, again, coming back to my initial remarks in our conversation, also a founder, one of the strongest founder qualities is actually the communication skills.
Yeah.
Because if they can't communicate, they can't hire. If they can't communicate, they have a hard time fundraising and they have a hard time selling.
True. Daniel, we don't have so much time left. Can you please mention just a few investees so people who don't know Speedinvest realize the kind of companies you've been already investing in, and you have already some unicorns in your portfolio.
Happy to shed some light on our portfolio companies. So probably the best known companies in our portfolio would be WeFox, a digital insurance from Berlin, Tier Mobility, electric scooter company, Bitpanda, Wayflyer, Move, Coach Hub, some French companies such as Luco, My Data Models, and plenty others. Typically, as said, our biggest successes so far, they all stem from fintech, marketplaces, and climate and industrial tech, which I think is a general verdict on the topic of specialization within the venture industries. The more seed stage you get, the more specialized a fund should be, I think, and that clearly shows, because that allows you to, over time, build sector expertise, build up experience, gives you a broad overview over the market on trending topics, trending team, trending technologies, and makes it easier for you to select. I mean, we simply by the numbers, we screen 10,000 opportunities a year and we pick 30.
Wow. 10,000.
So in 9,970 times, we end up saying no. And this is very bizarre, right? To be a venture capitalist, you need to be a total optimist, almost pathological optimist. Then you end up in 99.7% of the time end up saying no. It's interesting from a sheer psychological point of view.
Okay, Daniel, it was very, very interesting. And thank you also for explaining to us the investor relation role. To conclude, can you please recommend us, I don't know, a book or a podcast, something that inspires you or inspired you?
But the tragic thing is you don't end up reading that many books. You have to read so much, newsletters and similar things. The last book I read is actually from Scott Galloway, Post-Corona. That is a very interesting point of view on how technology has fared in the years pre, through, and post-pandemic. A podcast from pure VC perspective, there is actually two. There's obviously 20 VC of Harry Stebbings from London,
Of course.
Which is there, and there's a German one called Unicorn Bakery from Fabian Tausch.
In German.
In German, focusing on the German market. Both interesting, very interesting discussions to follow there. Not having the chance to read this many books is probably one of the very, very rare things that I regret in our business. There's just no time.
I know. Okay, Daniel, it was very insightful. Thank you again for your time, and thank you for accepting my invitation.
Thank you for having me. It was a pleasure. All the best.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you all for listening and sharing this moment with us. Don't hesitate to contact me on Twitter or LinkedIn to share your comments and reactions. You can also rate this episode on your favorite podcast platform. See you soon.